So within our space, you talked about data representing people. It should be used to tell stories. We have to go beyond the numbers. Talk to me a little bit about why it's important to not only look solely at the numbers.
Well, I think when you're thinking about data, again, you can use it to tell any kind of story that you would like. But when you think beyond the numbers, you're thinking about the people who that data represents. And so there's a community behind those numbers. And it prompts you to ask questions like, what's the history in a community that is providing data? Who are the people in this community? What are all the nuances behind that data, the stories?
And to build on that, this is another way that we want to humanize. Data can be used as a weapon. It can be used to make a case against a community or a person. And we want to make sure that people are seen as whole as much as possible. So instead of thinking about data as numbers and charts and graphs and simply science and math elements, we're also thinking about data as stories, again, as information, as something that everyone has access to. Everyone has a story they can tell. Everybody has a past, that they've been through and a future they're looking forward to. And data can help us, get into those stories and create those futures. And so I think that humanizing piece of how we think about data is really important.
And just to kind of piggyback off of what you were saying, data in a humanizing way, if we're trying to use it in a humanizing way, it's an opportunity to engage communities to create their own authoritative voice, right? That's missing so much, so often. I talked in another time about how this white saviorism complex can cause us to talk about communities that we serve in a way that's like, oh, we have the solution, we have the answers, we know what you need, we are the experts. And with data, there's an opportunity to engage communities to provide further context to that data and fully tell the story about what's really going on that goes beyond those numbers.
Yes, and so in that way, instead of talking about communities, we're talking with communities.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
And they have some power and some, what's the word?
Some ownership.
Ownership,
Yes.
Yes. They have some ownership over the experience. And so that's another, I really like that point, Penny. Yes.
Yeah, I definitely, thinking about the community wisdom, right, that can only add to that data story. I think a lot of times people don't think about that. They don't think to go back to communities to say, we'd like to present you with the community. It's almost like there needs to be a returning of the data to the community. Absolutely. And the community should be engaged at all of these different points, because it truly is something that they should have ownership of. And I really like your take of it, Atina. You had talked before about just how data is, it's a resource, but it's also highly monetized. And so we should be thinking about how is the community benefiting from this data research project that's being conducted in their neighborhoods? How does it come back to them? Do they have any say in the way it's disseminated, in the way it's used? They should.
Yes, as a community resource. And I remembered the word autonomy. How communities have autonomy over such a valuable resource that they already have, that they already own, but don't necessarily know that they own, because people are really encouraged to think about data as something that's over there, something that's not for me to use or have or talk about. And we want to make it so that people have a sense of this is coming from me, this belongs to me, this is my story, and I get to control who has access to it, how it is used, how I am represented in it. That is the autonomy and really the power that is really important about data, that we want people to understand. We want to spread the message of communities deserve to have autonomy over their own resources, including data.
Absolutely. And that's interesting that you say that, because oftentimes data can actually be used to do harm to communities. But if they have that ownership, that autonomy, if they're able to unleash that power and be engaged in the data research process, it's less likely that that data will be used to weaponize them. So I have a question that I would like for each of you to respond to. When you look at a data set, what's something that comes to mind for you?
I'd say one of the questions that I would ask myself is, how is the community involved in this data set? Who's profiting from this data set? How are resources coming back to the community based on what this data says?
Whose lens was being used in creating that data set?
Yeah.
You know, what research question was being asked? Was it the funder, the research organization, or was it from the community? Who's it gonna be valuable to at the end of the day?
So my answer is a little bit in the weeds, but this really is what I think about.
Okay.
I think about, is the question that was asked the question that got answered? And I think about that because often when you are dealing with cross-cultural or interracial conversations, sometimes someone can ask a question that means one thing to them but means something different to the person answering the question. And people who speak African American English can be saying something entirely different, and an academic from the ivory tower might have no idea what that person means. And I think about that a lot when I kind of read through, what did this person say? What did that person say? Are they on the same page? Because that really impacts the validity of your data. If you are kind of not speaking the same language as the person you're interviewing. So that's what I think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And to add to that, the data that's collected is then the stories that are told. Right? So if you have a breakdown at any point in that data collection process, in that data analysis process, you have a breakdown in that story, and then you have a breakdown in the way that the community is impacted.
Right. And that's a way, honestly, that takes power away from the people telling the story if it's not told in the way, that was intended, in the spirit in which it was offered, but is then, put through the lens of someone who has an entirely different experience and doesn't really understand where you're coming from.
Yeah.
That's real.
All right.
Mic drop.
Bam.